Welcome back to the Peachy Graduate Podcast. I am very excited, as I always am, to introduce my guest today, Thea Baker. Welcome, Thea. Great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Great stuff. So Thea Baker, counsellor and psychotherapist.
Yes, that's the current working title that we're going with. Kind of.
But you haven't always done that. I'm really keen to find out how you got to where you are now and what led you down that path, because you've got a more exercisey background. You've done the group fitness thing, and I'm sure a few other things. So maybe take us back and sort of tell us where that started and then how you got to here.
Yeah, it's a fun journey, actually. It started with a history degree, right? Okay. When I finished my A-levels, so that's like year 12, or I'm not sure what that is in New Zealand equivalent, but the end of your high school. I was like, okay, well, I want to go to university. I didn't do as well in history as I wanted to. My best subject was geography. I had this kind of like, oh my gosh, maybe I should do geography. Like, this is like my dilemma, and you'll hear it through this story, right? So I went off, did my degree, which in the UK is a 3-year honours degree. In my third year, I spent most of my time in some state of panic/paralysis around, well, what am I going to do? This seemed like a good idea at the time. I was a nerd, like always have been. Loved what I was doing, loved researching, loved asking questions and loved writing. And I remember asking one of my professors that I did a lot of work with in my final year, I was like, maybe I could just stay here. Maybe I could just be an academic. Maybe I could be an academic. And he said, absolutely not. I don't want that for you. You're going to become bitter and twisted. You need to. This was much more about him than it was about me, actually. I now realize. But he's like, you need to go into the world. You should write, like, be a journalist. And I'm like, hell no. I did explore it, but I was like, it just feels icky and British press, gross. I was just like, yuck. So I was like, okay, well, what else do you do except teach? So maybe I'll be a teacher in high school. Got into Cambridge University to do my postgrad of teaching. Which I was really excited about. My mum was a career teacher before she retired. And I was a bit like, ick, maybe I don't want to be like my mum. So that was playing in the back of my mind. And then I was like, I'm 21. Ideally, I want to teach people that are the older end of high school who love their subject. I'm going to really struggle with people who can't get on board with history, right? Like, that was my passion. So I was like, well, maybe this isn't a good idea for me. So I turned down that place at Cambridge University. And I don't even know how, ended up in corporate HR. So I worked as a business partner in a mobile tech company that was a sort of funded startup out of a big consultancy firm, one of the big 4 consultancy firms. So I'm that old that I remember when they were literally working with 2G. It was like just exploding in terms of like volume, and we were recruiting people from all over the world because this was like cutting edge technology, right? HR was fascinating for me because I learned about humans. And I guess this is like the beginning of, well, actually, even the history degree, right? It goes right back to this idea of curiosity and being interested in why. What do we learn as a race? That's what history taught me. It taught me to be a critical thinker. It taught me to be analytical and curious about information and how we receive it, and who is providing us with that information, right? Then I worked in this corporate organization where I got to observe human behavior and also the kind of like the why of humans. Like, why do you want to be here? Like, I interviewed people all the time. I just got fascinated with asking questions, right? And spending time with people and listening and being interested about what makes people tick and whether that works in a kind of values aligned way, before we were talking about values, right, within organizations and where I was working. Loved that aspect, loved the people aspect, loved the intricacies of navigating complexity, within an organizational structure, hated corporate world, hated it. I was just not built for the rigidity that's required in working in that space. Yep. But I learned some really, really valuable skills. Fast forward a bit, I think I did that for maybe 7 years. Nearly went back. I side quest. I was like, maybe I'll go back and be a teacher now. Maybe I do know enough about the world that I can teach. Got another offer from a university in Southampton, which is where I was living on the south coast of the UK at the time. I was going to leave corporate HR to go and do my postgrad in teaching. Got that place, turned it down again because at that point I was like, actually, I really need to have children. I was married at the time, and I was like, actually, if I go do that, I've got to commit to that for a few years, and I really want to have kids now. So I turned that offer down again, had children, and that's really where my interest in the health and fitness space happened. All of these pieces really started to fall into place. I got lost in that experience. I didn't, these iterations, and you can hear me as I'm retelling it. I didn't know who I was. I was trying to figure out what mattered to me and how I could show up in this world. Then I had kids, and that was a whole other identity. And I just found that whole thing so difficult, like beautifully challenging, and loved it. I did 7 years full time, stay-at-home mum stuff. But also psychologically, that really knocked me around. And the way that I always say I found my way back to myself, but I think it was like the next iteration of me was getting back into physical activity, which for my passion was swimming. I'd swam as a kid. I was born on a tiny island in the Caribbean, right? So my parents always used to say, you swam before you walked, kind of thing. So swimming was like my thing. I got back in the pool. Fun, brilliant mental health effect. People can't get you in a swimming pool. If you're doing freestyle and your head's down, following that black line, children can't reach you, and nothing can get at you. So it's just like brilliant. Nice. And then I moved to Australia with 2 little children, with that commitment to myself that I was going to keep swimming for me. I joined I wouldn't have called it a squad in the UK. It was just like a training session out of the gym. A triathlete that happened to be one of the PTs there ran a swim squad on a Saturday morning, and I went along. And he was really structured. It was the first time I'd had that experience of having structured swimming since a child. So we did like 400-meter time trials and that kind of thing. So I knew my times, and I knew I was getting quicker. But then when I moved to Australia, I had this idea in my head that I was going to join a swimming team, a club. And it terrified me because, Australian swimmers are just way better than anybody in the UK, right? So
sure.
that was my story. And we had tiny little swimming pools in the UK, 25-meter indoor pools. Nobody swims outside. Nobody swims in a 50-meter pool, not unless they're completely crackers. And so I joined a swim team when I moved here as part of my commitment to my own health and fitness journey. But I was completely obsessed with swimming at this point. And then I broke my foot within a few months of being in Australia. I'd just been asked to swim at nationals. So we're talking masters level swimming. And I had been asked to swim at nationals in Perth. And I broke my foot. And I spent my first it was my first summer, but it was very hot for an English person, summer in a plaster cast on my deck in Australia. And I was like, I just made all this like progress. I had, found some people in a swim team, and I was getting really good. Like I was like really good, and I didn't realize that I was good at it until then. And then I couldn't do it. And so I took myself off to Rebel Sport. Actually, I didn't take myself off. My husband at the time took me to Rebel Sport because I couldn't drive because I had a plaster cast. Loaded up with all of the weights, and I figured out how I would train myself dry land training for the whole, and it took months. So there I am training myself, and I can still see myself lying there with my pink plaster cast looking up at the sky. And I was like, maybe if I could do this for me, maybe I can do this for other people. Maybe I can help other postnatal women. Like, and I was quite postnatal at this point. My eldest was about to start school. Maybe that's the thing. And I rocked up to my interview to do my Cert 4 or whatever it is in PT over here in a plaster cast on crutches. And I was like, I want to do this. I was mid-30s. It felt like a complete fraud. How can I do this? Is that crazy? They're like, sure, of course you can. Let's go. I think I banged out my qualifications mostly online in 6 months.
Yeah.
In that time, met Mish Wright, was her first franchisee with Mishfit.
Right.
Set up my own business with her, working with pregnant and postnatal and quite postnatal mums in that space. And really quickly ended up working with like complicated, I would say, complex experiences.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether it was not deliberate, right? That was not my intention. But I ended up working with the women who had really traumatic childbirth, right? Or and I'm talking psychologically and or physically traumatic. They had like lots of rehab. I did lots of collaborations with pelvic health physios, some of whom I still work with now when I'm supporting women who have had sexual abuse and other kind of trauma that mean that they need to see a women's health physio. And those relationships that I established, we're talking 10 years ago. I've been here 14 years, easily 10 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, are still relationships that I have now. But those women taught me, again, this curiosity, right? Why? Why is your body responding the way that it is? When we're talking about your trauma, right? Whether that is your birth or whether that is because, as so many of the people probably listening will kind of know, when you're a PT, people tell you all the things. If you make that space safe for them. And apparently that's what I did. Like, I didn't realize that that was the thing that I did really, really well, but that's what I did. And I think that's why I ended up with the people that I worked with. So they came, I learned about human bodies, I learned about human psychology, I learned about trauma because I observed it. But then I felt like I wasn't skilled enough to support that side of things. So then off I go and I'm on this big quest. So then I go back to university. This time I got a place at Monash and I did the thing, not teaching this time. I did my counselling and psychotherapy masters. And that's when I really started to kind of bring these two worlds together. Until now I've switched almost pretty much exclusively into that that mental health space rather, with a strong emphasis on what our body holds and what it tells us, and helping people who come to me to work through their trauma or work with their anxiety and because essentially anxiety is a physiological response, right? We think it's just about those ruminating thoughts or those anxious, preoccupying thoughts, but actually people are so disconnected from their physical bodies that they don't want to feel what they're feeling, right? And that's essentially the work that I get to do now, along with bringing all of it together with a PhD, because that's what you do, where I'm looking at physical health, physical activity and how mental health come together. Sorry, it's really long-winded, but that is essentially how I've gotten to where I am now.
Thank you. I like it. Good to have the full backstory, so there's lots of context.
Context is key. I tell people that all the time.
Absolutely. You can't fully understand without it. I'm quite curious. The foot that you broke, sorry, this is I'm very curious about everything else, but I've just got this thing in the back of my mind about your broken foot. Was that the same side that you had the hip replaced, or was it the other side?
Same side.
Same side.
Same side. And so I've had 4 hip surgeries. I had bilateral hip surgeries 2 weeks apart. And so I had cam and pincer impingement. Gosh, it was like taking me back. So my ball and socket joints were essentially like rubbing on each other. I had cartilage that had oh my goodness, I can't even remember the bits of tissue, those soft bit of glue that sits in between the two, but that had all shredded. Like my hips were completely ruined. So I was they shaved away the bone from my ball and my socket so
Yeah.
that everything fitted together nicely.
Okay.
Tied me up with, like, I've got the video of it all being tied up. Like, it looks like twine. I'd like to think it's a bit more secure than that. I had labral tears. I had, like, both hips were completely trashed. I was going to swear, but I actually stopped myself. So I had both of those, and then the right hip looked on scans like it was a lot better than the left, and so we did it first. Actually, it was a lot worse than the left when they got in there. I re-tore my labrum on the right-hand side, maybe, I don't know, a couple of months, maybe within 6 months of that first surgery. So I had another, same arthroscope. I had the same thing. They went in and repaired it again. And then my surgeon was really honest with me, and he said to me, ultimately, you are not going to be okay until you're not going to be pain free until we've done a hip replacement. But we're going to try and get you to 50. I'm 47, and I had my hip replacement at 40 because my osteoarthritis just got so bad in my right hip that had to get done. And that was maybe 18 months after my first surgery. Yeah. So the left is still hanging in, and it hasn't been done yet, but I suspect it will. Yeah. And I've broken my right foot and then my right wrist since then.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So right hand side is completely not sensible.
So was your anatomy, the way you described it, it sounded like there was less space there than a traditional hip, or did you have a hip version where you were retroverted or antiverted?
No. So my surgeon, whenever he's talked to me, because I'm like, why? Like, honestly, why? Because my sport was swimming. So everyone goes, but your hips are not, like, they're not taking much. And I was like, well, I was an amazing kicker. Like, I was really, really good. For a distance swimmer, I had a 6-beat kick from the start, and everyone was like, that's insane. And I'm like, well, I don't know, because I was never, like, properly coached as a little kid, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of that. There's a bit of my hips are, I mean, one of the physios was like, they're very unstable. And I'm like, we don't use that language anymore, actually, because in the pelvic pain space, I know that is not language that we use, but okay. I'm one of those bendy humans. So I've always had issues with laxity in my joints. And I think that, I just, between swimming, my posture, if you ever see me standing when I'm presenting, like, I stand like a swimmer. If you ever watch a swimmer on the blocks, they just are, like, super, their knees are always locked out, their hips are always, like, I just still, that is just how my body has always been.
Okay. Interesting. So big swing back to what we were talking about previously. The PhD. So when you do a PhD, correct me if I'm wrong, it's new. You're hitting new ground, right? You're creating evidence that hasn't ever been created before, and therefore that's where the doctorate comes from. What is it that I'm assuming it's very complementary to what you're already doing in terms of the counselling and.
Yeah, so, well, kind of, because it doesn't fit neatly anywhere. So the psychology people don't like me. So when I was looking, so hang on. In PhD world, if you want to do a PhD, you have the people who are like, they always just have wanted to be an academic, and therefore getting the PhD is part of that journey.
Yeah.
And often you will apply, you can just look on university websites, see what projects that have already got funding that professors or associate professors are already working on, and they will be looking for PhD students as candidates to join and do part of that. So I know there's some big projects. I'm at Deakin University doing my PhD. There are some big projects that, maybe have 5 or 6 PhD students as part of a team, and they do a tiny slice of a big project. My thing, though, is that I'd had this idea from back when I was doing my master's of counselling and psychotherapy, but I was still working with women in my little PT studio in Croydon, in the outskirts of Melbourne. And I was just fascinated by these women who if I did all of the things that we're trained to do with regards pelvic floor activation, reconnecting that muscle memory, the brain connection to that part of their bodies, having those conversations, if we were just talking, their bodies would react. Like I would see adductors shaking.
Yeah.
We're not activating anything. We're not doing anything. We were not doing any physical movement. We were not actually trying to activate anything. But just in the conversation of, so we're just, this is what I'm talking to you about what we're going to do. And all of a sudden, there's this activation of adductors. And I was like, and I remember saying to this one particular woman, I'm like, curious, what's going on here for you? Like, I'm noticing this. Are you feeling that? Like, do you know that that is happening? It's like, yeah, it happens a lot, actually. I'm like, really? Tell me about, like, so we're off now. We're on a whole different place. We're like, 1 second, we're going to be doing some pelvic floor work. The next minute, I'm like, oh, tell me about that. She said, oh, well. And so this particular woman, she'd come to me. She had children who were similar age to me, that mine at the time. So early high school, late primary school. She had 3 children. She was going through a divorce, had gone through a divorce, and was just starting to date. So she was just about to start having sex with other people. So that's part of why she started to see me. She's like, I know that I've not been sexually active with my ex-husband for a while. I'm really daunted about what that looks like. I'm not sure how this body is working anymore. Can we talk about it? I know that one of my births was tricky. I feel like I've got some pelvic floor weakness. I don't want to go in a gym setting. You sound like someone who could help me. And I'm like, sure, let's talk. So we started talking, and she said, yeah, well, the other time I started seeing this guy, he happened to be a paramedic, right? And they'd had sex, or they were going to have sex, and this thing happened to her adductors. And the paramedic went, that's weird. The paramedic said something. Like, she's like, I don't know. But I also know that it happens when I get stressed. I'm like, does it? Okay, that's really interesting. And so we got into a whole conversation, and then all of a sudden she says to me, well, yeah, because growing up, there was a lot of not okay behavior that went on in my family. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. So this isn't about childbirth, actually. That was just like the icing on top of the cake, right? In fact, that was probably the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake. Tell me about that thing. If you're comfortable to do so, tell me. The more that we worked with these activation type, reconnecting in direct way to her body, the more she would come in and she'd go, so it wasn't, but I'm just going to use it as an example. My little finger on my right hand is really starting to hurt, or my ankle is really starting to hurt. And I'm like, okay, well, we've not done anything with those parts of the body. That's a fascinating response, isn't it? Don't you think? She's like, yeah, I know. But I used to love walking, and I can't even do that now. And I'm like, right, okay. I was like, so we had this really open conversation, and I was like, how do you feel about doing this work? Because I'm noticing that when we do some things, we're having this response, this bodily response that's fascinating to me. I don't know. And you keep coming back. How do you feel about that? Like in any other normal PT situation, I think you probably wouldn't be coming back. Like you'd probably go, well, this person doesn't know what they're doing, because I feel like I'm getting sore or worse, whatever that is, right? And she said, no, I trust you. And this feels like a really safe place for me to be. I need to be here, which is why I keep coming. I'm like, awesome. So are you okay if we just get a little bit creative with things? And she's like, absolutely. I trust you. I'm like, cool. She came in this one. So this was after a Christmas break. I remember that conversation. We didn't do any physical activity that session. We just had a big debrief. And I said, your body fascinates me. I really want to be able to see how I can help you. Blah, blah, blah. Are you up for it? She's like, yes. Came back. We tried boxing. She'd never boxed before. I promise that I'm going to answer the question. She'd never boxed before. And she left that session like a different human. And I was like, came back in the next week, no pain, no anything, nothing, no negative side, no, nothing, right? So we'd had all these weird kind of reactions. Now we've done something that was so much more vigorous, right? It was cognitively hard because she had to learn some things. Right. And she had to be very present. This is the very cool thing about boxing. You have to be very present. Otherwise you stuff up your drill, or we're not doing contact boxing, right? But like you're not going to get hit, but it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I got really curious about that. And I'm like, boxing is fascinating. So I started playing around with my clients, and I noticed, bearing in mind at the same time I'm studying at my master's level, doing that stuff. And I'm like, okay, how can I do this? So my PhD was born then. It just took a really long time to make it happen. COVID and children and blah, blah, blah.
Long gestation.
Totally. And it's about, can we use cardio boxing as an intervention for women who have experienced intimate partner violence? So we might call that gender-based violence or domestic violence, depending on, we use different terminology in different parts of the world. And so that essentially is the focus of my work is, how can we integrate that form of moderate, vigorous physical activity for women who have gone through that kind of trauma? There's lots of existing research on yoga, trauma-informed yoga for women who have experienced intimate partner violence. There are a few studies. I'm in the middle of my systematic review at the moment. There are a few studies looking at various forms of physical activity. There's a program in the US that's used a boxing intervention with some great outcomes, but this will be the first time that anything's been created in Australia for that cohort. And the way that things work in academia is somebody does a thing and someone then looks at that and goes, okay, well, how can we improve on it based on the limitations that you've highlighted in your study? So we'll be, working with my goal, and the focus of my middle two studies is to actually get input from women who have experienced intimate partner violence and the service sector that support women who have experienced intimate partner violence, because the goal is to make this translatable into the real world, right? So how can we actually bring out a community level program that women can access, not just it be some interesting, funky piece of research, right? Like how can we actually change women's lives?
Make it useful.
Absolutely.
Love it. Interesting how it's it's almost stumble across rather than preordained in terms of this is what it's going to be.
Totally. But it's that curious mindset, right? It's being fascinated by and just wondering and going down that path, right? Sometimes you find dead ends. But sometimes you open up a thing. I have not always, from the age of 26, I set myself 2 life goals at 26. One was to live overseas again, because I was born in the Caribbean, was moved back home, but my parents' home was England. So we moved back when I was 10. And from that point on, I never felt like England was never home to me. I remember grieving at my 21st birthday because it was the first time that I'd spent more time in England than I'd spent in what I considered home, which was Cayman. So from all of my adulthood, my 20s and early 30s, I was like, we need to leave. I need to leave. I nearly moved to France once, like it was always. So when I moved to Australia, I took that one off. The other one was that I wanted, my line was I wanted to die a doctor, right? I wanted to do a PhD always, but the question was on what?
Sure.
So that's been in the back of my mind. So I guess that part of me has just been looking for the thing, and this blended it all together.
Brilliant. I love that. Clever. This is the way it's come together is and you've just been open, right? That you've used the word curiosity a lot, and I think if I was to look at your values list, it would be pretty close to the top.
100. It is. It's and that when I was younger was, you're just so nosy, right? Like as a little kid, that's what I heard, right? I was the kid. I'm still the adult who asks why all the time. But as a kid, why are you asking that? That's just nosy, right? Like you shouldn't ask that, especially growing up in an very English environment. And I went to boarding school, right? Like that is not okay. And it took a long time to go, actually, no, it's asking questions is awesome. It's like, I love it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a superpower, not a problem. And
Yeah.
sadly, when you're told you're nosy, it's framed in a negative sense, and
Exactly.
you absorb that negativity, and it sort of shuts it down. Whereas actually, it's something that you want to develop and harness.
That's
The
right.
other thing I'm curious about is the eye movement desensitization.
Yeah.
That just caught
EMDR.
my imagination,
Yeah.
my curiosity, because
Yeah.
yeah, what is it?
Good question. Well, this does link in with my thinking with boxing, but I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is a form of therapy modality, a way that we work with. Mostly it was developed for PTSD and event-based PTSD.
Right.
So it came at, the story goes, a lady called Francine Shapiro, who was a clinician in the US. Excuse me, this is when you shouldn't drink fizzy water and you're doing a podcast, right?
I
It makes
always
you
do
burp.
that.
Can't help it. She worked with cohorts of army vets in the US after the Vietnam War. And she, curious human, was really trying to figure out how because back then we just, we medicated people. We did lots of talk. Like back then it was, you just keep talking about your trauma until you're so desensitized to the fact that it was bad that it's not distressing anymore. Except that now we know that the more you do that, the more distressing it becomes. Like, it's actually a little bit counterintuitive. Yeah. And that is really problematic. So she's wandering around, the story goes, she's wandering around Central Park thinking about distressing things, and she's watching these ducks swimming back and forth, these little ducks swimming back and forth on the lake in Central Park.
Yeah.
And then she realizes that when she went back to think about that thing that she was thinking about that had made her really distressed, she was not feeling as upset anymore. The distress levels had dropped.
Yeah.
So she got curious about what was going on there and went to do some research, right? And essentially what she learned is that if we activate a distressing memory to the point where in the moment you're in a setting, in a clinical setting with your clinician, your therapist, it feels like you are back there reliving it, right? To the point where not only do you have a visual picture of what was happening at the time, but that you maybe even can smell what you smelt at the time, or viscerally you feel in your body what was happening, right? Whether that is a sensation in your stomach, or I don't know, you feel sick, but you can still feel it now, right? And you associate that with the feelings, the emotions, like whether it's anger or fear or whatever that is, alongside the negative belief that you have about yourself. So we call that a negative cognition of self. Based on that thing that happened, but that you still believe today. Like, I cannot keep myself safe. I am unlovable. I am defective. I'm bad, right?
Right.
I've got goosebumps even saying it, right? So you put all of that together, and then, so you activate this memory, and then we do this thing called bilateral stimulation, which originally was eye movement. So right, left, right, left, right, left, fast. Cool. I'm, for those that are listening, waving my fingers back and forth at the screen, right? Quickly. And so essentially what we're doing is activating the distress part of the brain at the same time as activating our working memory, and saying, try and do both of those things at once. Brain, get busy.
Yes.
With this bilateral stimulation. And we use eye movement, we use tapping, so right, left on your body, or you can hold little buzzers that go right, left, sound beeps that go right, left in your, and sometimes we have to get people physically moving, right? Like sometimes we have to activate this working memory. If that trauma was really embedded very early, sometimes we have to get super creative with it.
Yeah. And
essentially what we learn is that bilateral stimulation reduces distress associated with the memory. So say when we start, that's a 9 out of 10 distress level for you. Over time, as we do sets of that bilateral stimulation, we take a pause, and I'll say to somebody, and what are you noticing now? So we're bringing people back into the we've got this, what was called dual attention going on. Part of us is in that memory back in the past, but there is a part of us that is right here, right now, and we're grounded and safe, and you're with your clinician. And over sets of this that can last an entire session, sometimes will go on multiple sessions in working with one memory, that distress drops, right? So now when you go back, just go back to that memory and just tell me what you notice about it now. And at some point, people will say things like, well, that's weird. It's like, I know it happened, but I can't see it vividly anymore. I'm like, oh, okay, just notice that. And we go back to doing some bilateral stimulation. We just keep going.
Yeah.
Or they'll say things like, it's weird because it's like I'm looking through like frosted glass at it. Like it's there, but I can't quite get it. Or it's like through fog. I know it's there. I'm like, okay, so what do you feel in your body right now when you connect to that? Like, what's happening for you? I'm like, yeah, well, that feels okay, actually. Right. Then the distress drops down to, I don't know, 2, 0, hopefully. That would be our ideal. So now what do you believe about yourself in the positive, right? So if it was, I can't keep myself safe, like say it was some horrific car accident or something, right? Maybe we work with that positive belief of, I can keep myself safe enough, right? Because people who've experienced trauma might not go, I can believe 100% that I can keep myself safe, because you know what? Bad stuff happens in the world, because I know that because it's happened to me. But I can keep myself safe enough. Yeah, maybe I believe that. Okay, let's do a bilateral stimulation set or 2 on that, and we strengthen that positive belief. So the way that EMDR works is, it says once we remove the distress about that memory, we knock it out of the part of the brain that reminds you that something bad happened and you need to remember. It's right at the front of the brain. It's not literally at the front of your brain, because that's your prefrontal cortex, but it's like it can't be filed away where other memories go, non-distressing memories. So if I said to you, Rich, what happened on your 7th birthday? Did anything bad happen on your 7th birthday? I'm hoping not.
Too much jelly and ice cream.
Right. So exactly. You have to go searching in your brain to go, yeah, actually, I don't know. Where was I living? Did my mum make me a cake? Like, I don't know. Did I have friends that came over to my party, right? As long as that's not a distressing memory, it's filed away. That's what happens. These traumatic memories, though, if something horrific had happened on your 7th birthday, it would have been there like that. You'd have gone, I was wearing a green shirt with like checks on it, my little shorts and whatever, right? You would be there in a heartbeat. Well, what this process does is it helps it go, okay, no distress attached to it. Your brain says, therefore, we can let it go. Right? We don't have to hold it there in order to keep you safe. Let's file it away.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And it's very, very effective on. So World Health Organization has it as the gold standard of working with PTSD. So event-based trauma, it is exceptional. It's really, it can be really quick for people, where this other, the sort of trauma-focused CBT type talk approach is a lot longer. A lot of the trauma that I work with is what we might call complex trauma, or that early attachment trauma. It's still effective with that. We're still, it takes longer, right? We're still within the trauma field. We're really working on how do we work with that attachment trauma most effectively, because for EMDR to work as well as it does with event-based trauma, if nothing in inverted commas bad has happened to you in your life, and then you have some epic car crash at 24, at 23 you had a really solid sense of self that could believe really good things, right? And we can go back to that, and that's embedded and awesome when we're doing processing, right? If you have had trauma from the second you were born, if not earlier, because in utero we experience what our mothers and family around us experience, right? We've got no inherently solid grounded sense of self to fall back on. So when we try to embed a positive belief, we have to start really carefully, because they are not going to believe, those people are not going to believe that I can keep myself safe, right? They probably won't even believe I can keep myself safe enough. They probably have a whole bunch of beliefs around the fact that the people that are supposed to keep them safe have done the things that hurt them. So I can't even reach out for help because that's dangerous. So it's a much more complex process with early attachment and, trauma from childhood. But it's still very effective because we can reduce distress around events within that, and we can still get there. It just takes a bit longer. Yeah, but this bilateral stimulation thing, I think, my physical activity brain goes, yeah, boxing's right, left.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in that. So like my future Thea is like, that is some great future research right there, like bringing the worlds of EMDR and physical activity together in that way. But that's a whole other,
that's
maybe
exciting.
another lifetime. Who
Very
knows?
exciting.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Thank you. That's brilliant. You're so good at explaining concepts and giving real life examples. And I found that at your presentation at conference last year was that it was very accessible. And when I walked away, I had the best set of notes from your lecture than anybody else's. And I was trying to work out what I'd said in all the other ones, but I think the way you think and the way you present and the way you create slides so that people can understand what you're saying, but also translate that into takeaway information is very, very good. So I can see why you've been successful at what you do.
Oh, I really appreciate you saying that. It's like we were talking before we came on record that I've just started teaching at the university, doing some teaching with the undergrads, and I kind of really needed to hear that. Actually, I really appreciate you saying that, just because teaching in that environment feels, I don't know, I've turned down 2 postgrad opportunities to formally teach. I've presented a fair bit. I've never taught undergraduate students before. It feels like, am I getting my message across? So thank you. That was really
certainly my experience. Absolutely. And if we go back a few years prior to that, I remember turning up to one of your presentations. I can't remember what year it was, but it was the 10 top tips that PTs know about working with women.
Yeah.
And I was lucky to get a seat because they were backed up out the door, and people were leaning in through windows, and all sorts of stuff. It was a phenomenal attendance, and just testament to not just the subject, but to you as a presenter, and the fact that they are hot topics, they are well researched topics, and they are very relevant to everybody in the industry. And I think people listening to this will get a lot out of what they've heard today, but there's a lot more. I could probably sit here for another couple of hours, but I know we haven't got that available.
Well, and sadly, I could talk for another couple of hours, so it's best you don't let me.
But maybe we plan another one in the future, and we talk to Dr. Thea.
That would be hilarious. That I can't. It's it feels not out of the reach that it used to. It still also feels quite a number of papers away at this point, but we'll get there. Yeah. And I guess that's the one thing, if I could say anything to the people listening, and I said this to the students that I was working with this week at uni, right? The world delivers you all sorts of, twists and turns. Part of the reason, and I didn't get into it, but part of the reason that I was also fascinated in trauma is that through my own lived experience, right? And my second husband died very dramatically and traumatically in an ocean swim. So we both used to swim competitively together, and it was just after I'd had those first 2 hip surgeries, so I wasn't swimming that season, that ocean swimming season, but he didn't make it out of the swim. And that curiosity, that experience made me go, well, I didn't develop PTSD, so why not? Like, actually, I have attachment trauma. Like, clinically, I know that is part of my backstory. Boarding school is not a great place to develop strong, attachment to caregivers. And then this thing happens. Like, actually, why not? How do some people, why? Right? Like, all of those questions. And so, the world can nudge you if you're just open to it and go, well, how can I, that's not me silver lining bad experiences. I don't mean it to sound like that, but that just because you have this vision of where your life is going to go and how your career is going to go and why you get into the health and fitness industry at the beginning might not be why you stay in it or why you apply it the same way that you did when you first started. And so I guess I'd just be open to all of the opportunities and see it as a way of bringing worlds together, rather than going, well, that means to do that thing, I have to leave that thing behind. Well, or you can bring some of that stuff with you. Like, my experience of working in HR is still part of what I do now. Part of my presenting came from running, training in a corporate setting. Like, I was teaching way much more boring stuff. It was like employment law. Oh my goodness. Like, if you can make that interesting for people who don't want to be there just quietly, you can, talk about anything. Well, so just soak up all of the opportunities, and don't let yourself get pigeonholed. And I think the health and fitness industry can be so tricky, because you have to find a niche or get a name for yourself in some space. Actually, you can just go be a magpie, collect all the things, right? And then how can you put it together? Like, I would never have thought I'd be here now when I did my, when I rocked up with my pink plaster cast and said, I want to train to be a PT, please.
Brilliant. That's superb. I think you've kind of already answered something I haven't asked, which is those top tips. It's there's clearly a strong sense of curiosity, and the way you've just sort of packaged that last bit up there in terms of, don't feel like you have to be siloed. You can be eclectic, and that immediately gives you a point of difference. So those are great, and I'll document those. Any other sort of things that on the top of your head that you think could be useful?
Just ask questions of you. If you are working as a PT or any other kind of health and fitness anywhere in that kind of allied health space, you don't have to fix any of the things. Like, it was well outside of my scope of practice to think that I was going to fix that. Won't fix. She wasn't broken. She didn't need fixing, right? But to like work with the trauma of whatever she experienced growing up. I didn't that wasn't why I asked. It wasn't like, now I know this thing, I have to do something with it. No, I know that because that's context for this body and this human that I'm working with. Just ask the questions, because then collectively you can come up with what you're going to do with that, or find somebody. If there is one skill I wish that I could, like, my poor children, they're just like, please, stop with the asking of the questions. I'm like, no, you need to get really good at it, because that's what makes us unique as humans. If AI is going to take over the world or whatever, they're not going to be able to do the kinds of question asking that humans can, if we remain curious and open.
Brilliant. Love it. That's fantastic. A great note to finish on. I've got your website, so I'm thinking that might be the best place for people to find you if they're looking for you or wanted to chat. Or
absolutely, I love to point people in the right direction. One of my, whenever when I was over in New Zealand, had lots of people coming up and saying, how did you get into this, or what kind of pathways? That's one of the questions that I often get asked. In terms of I'm going to be really transparent. In terms of therapeutic support, my books are 100% closed at the minute because of this PhD. I'm on a scholarship with the uni, and I can't see people because that's just like a whole thing. I have a tiny caseload, and that's all I'm allowed to do. But I do have people that I do have people who work in the practice. So, and we work online. If there's somebody that wants support, I don't want you to think we can't help. Also, we're really good at referring, so we can find people for people. And then, website, Instagram, whatever.
Perfect.
And can I do a shameless plug?
Of course.
For in the future, if people, because I have a mind that goes, at some point I've got to do this intervention. I've got to run a program for women who have experienced intimate partner violence, who are interested in boxing, who would commit to doing that. At some point, I'm going to be really desperate for participants. So if people know people, or, I don't know, please just stay across my, I guess, Instagram, probably Facebook, because at some point I'm going to be asking, I'm going to have to get creative and find some people who want to do this thing. So I would really appreciate that.
I'll find those, and I'll put those in the show notes as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Cool. Hey, thanks, Thea. It's been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you for your time.
My pleasure.